Hello, I'm Chloe Rigby, editor of InternetRetailing.net, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Inventory Where the People Are, How Hyperlocal and Micro-Fulfilment are Changing the Game in Bulletproofing Fulfillment. Over the next hour, we'll be hearing from Nigel Lahiri, Sales Director EMEA at Grey Orange, and Tim Orid, Director of the FOR Partnership, on how to implement micro-fulfillment and omni-channel strategies in order to meet customers' changing expectations. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about our speakers. Nigel Lahiri has worked in the field of supply chain software for more than 25 years, and he has a focus on warehouse management and execution solutions, as well as supply chain planning and optimization, and specializes in omnichannel and e-commerce retail across Europe and the US. He's worked with retailers such as M&S, Lidl, Ahold, The Entertainer, Disney, Waitrose and Boots, to name just a few. And Grey Orange is a global company that modernizes order fulfillment through artificial intelligence-driven software and AI-driven mobile robots built together so they cooperate in deciding and executing warehouse activities to maximize payoffs and minimize trade-offs to create the highest yield. Tim Orid is the director with the FOR Partnership, a specialist supply chain and logistics consultancy that works to create the right logistics infrastructure for the future, particularly e-commerce, and the partnership also provides consulting services for retail and e-commerce. Areas of expertise include robotics, mechanization, automation, distribution center acquisition, design and fit out, and clients include Yandex, Amazon, Smurfit, Brandali, Esprit and Unilever. Before setting up the FOR Partnership with Ray Fowler, Tim held board and exec level positions with a number of major retailers and logistics companies, including Marks & Spencer, Superdry, Waterstones, Entertainment UK and Woolworths. Just to let you know before we start that at the end of today's webinar, we'll move into a Q&A session. You can ask your question through the chat box on the screen and do mark if it's intended for one speaker or the other, and we'll aim to answer as many questions as we can today. A reminder as well that the session is recorded and we'll send out an email with the link so you can watch it again whenever it's convenient for you. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Tim Orid, Director of the FOR Partnership. Tim, welcome to the webinar.
Chloe, thanks very much for that introduction, and I'll move straight into my first slide. We have had a good introduction from Chloe. I don't want to spend too long talking about what we do as a separate partnership. Essentially, we differentiate ourselves by looking to bridge the gaps between industries who work in sectors that are related but are culturally very different. So, for example, property companies understand well how to build distribution centres, but aren't necessarily particularly familiar with what happens inside them. So that by bringing together knowledge of the occupiers to property companies, we're able to help them shape distribution centres for the future and help them predict and anticipate where the market's going to go. Much of our work over the last 10 years or so has been around e-commerce, and in particular understanding the issues and problems with automating large-scale e-commerce operations and how to achieve the ever-increasing customer service expectations via automation. So we've got a rounded experience. We tend to work for a select number of blue chip clients, and we're very happy to partner with Grey Orange today. And without further ado, I'll move into our first slide. So essentially what we're looking to do is just take through a little sequence before we move into the main part of the Grey Orange presentation, where we're looking at themes in retail fulfillment before the impact of the virus, and then we'll just have a couple of slides on looking at the impact of the virus and how that has shaped things. Essentially, though, I think we'll see that the impact of the virus has, to a large extent, accelerated pre-existing trends, so that it's acted as a catalyst for things that were taking place already. Let's look at a couple of those trends. Automation has expanded very rapidly, so the large tier 1 integrators, primarily German, to some extent Austrian, people such as Knapp, Dematic, SSI, Schaefer, etc., they're typically doubling their business every 5 years. And in fact, the demand for their automation is so significant that customers very often have to join a waiting list or a queue before being accepted into their manufacturing sequence. This is an important point that we need to bear in mind. Typically, the lead time around automation and implementation is measured in years rather than months and is very significant. Another significant trend is the increasing development of robotic platforms. And by robotic platforms, I mean the good-to-person equipment that Nigel is about to talk about. So this is a trend that is already established prior to the virus, and there are probably about 100,000 platforms already deployed in Western Europe, depending on what your definition of a platform is. Another significant trend, and this is important for micro-fulfilment, is that the clean air agenda is becoming increasingly important. And in fact, just before the impact of the virus, there were significant scientific studies coming out demonstrating that there was a causal link between nitrous oxide emissions in diesel and lung cancer. And in effect, there was the beginning of a clean air agenda, not just in London itself, but in significant regional cities such as Bristol, Manchester and Birmingham. And the relevance of the clean air initiative for micro-fulfilment is that the only way really of consistently hitting a clean air target is to use electric delivery vehicles rather than diesel delivery vehicles in urban areas. And because they have short ranges, in essence, an electric vehicle requires some kind of consolidation and loading zone just on the edge of the clean air zone. If you look at the retail sector, one of the very significant trends that has been well established for a long time is that, with the exception of the food retailers, the vast majority of non-food traditional retailers, bricks and mortar retailers, have seen their profitability either very significantly erode or in many cases evaporate. And the long-term prospects for profitability within the non-food retail sector away from online retailing were already looking significantly challenged prior to the impact of the virus. Although I've excluded non-food retail chains because they are profitable, even their profitability is under significant strain when you consider that you're running a business, say, of Sainsbury's size, 25, 30 billion turnover, and you're making margins of less than 3%. It's a very, very large, very complex business to squeeze out a small operating profit. E-commerce has expanded significantly, depending on the definition. It's probably now around about 20% of sales in the UK, retail sales in the UK, higher if you exclude food, and that's the well-established factor. And then probably the other relevant factor for micro-fulfilment and for robotic platforms is that there's a simple shortage of high-quality labour prepared to work in distribution centres. Most distribution centres, particularly retail distribution centres, have historically been manual, and they're probably significantly manual even today, probably to the extent of 90%. They have, in the distribution centres, tended to rely on labour not born in the UK, a lot from the Eastern Europe, and this was very significantly impacted by Brexit, not necessarily because of the political impact from Brexit, but simply because of the decline in the pound versus the euro, and the ability to remit money back home has always been a significant motivating factor for this labour, and a drop of about 20% in the sterling euro rate had a very significant effect in reducing the attractiveness of working in UK distribution centres. So let's look at how this began to develop. The pressure for significant urban distribution property in order to undertake either consolidation operations or some element of micro-fulfilment is easily illustrated by a client that we worked with. And what I'm showing here is the sales agent brochure for a distribution property. So let's just look at a couple of key factors about this. It's a very well-sited property. In fact, many of you will probably know it as the old Iron Mountain storage depot on the left-hand side of the Blackwall Tunnel approaches as you head south. Key aspects about it are that it's a 1930s concrete portal frame building with, in the front, just next to the Gillender Street writing, a Victorian office block. The Victorian office block had a very high listing on it. The portal frame made it a very difficult building to convert. And if you look at the yard size at both the top and the bottom, they were not sufficient to get a 40-foot delivery vehicle on or off, and the access from the A12 is severely constrained. So this property was marketed at a price of about 20 million. And when you use as a reference point what you could purchase in the distribution heartlands of the Midlands, that represents a very, very high price for this type of property. Nevertheless, the property was sold to a client and we worked with them to develop it as an urban fulfillment centre. Now, here's another example of a creative and innovative use of property in order to undertake either micro-fulfillment or, in this case, parcel delivery. This is a parcel delivery depot set up by DPD in Westminster in a prime location. I think there may be a couple of attendees from DPD here today, but I would pay tribute to DPD's progressiveness in terms of pushing constantly to explore the options for sourcing property in ways that historically would not have been viewed as acceptable. And another example of this is the point that I make on this slide, the use of the Marble Arch underground car park for an out-of-hours fulfillment operation at night time. And I would simply make the summary point here, and I think this is particularly important for property and investors separately, is that the pressure for micro and urban fulfillment is so high that it's not a case of taking fit for purpose buildings. It's a case of taking a building that may be just about acceptable and then flexing the operation to suit that building. And again, this is a highly relevant point for robotic platforms because of their flexibility. The ability to work in buildings which historically would not have been viewed as acceptable will make them increasingly relevant for micro-fulfillment. Okay, so we said that we would look at the impact of COVID-19, and I believe firmly that if, in effect, what it will do is accelerate existing trends. So, for instance, the clean air agenda. Again, statistical evidence about the impact of the virus shows that there's a strong link between urban pollution and the incidence and impact of the virus. So if you look at the stats coming out of Milan, heavy urban pollution, very heavy incidence of impact from the virus. And I think that most of the political parties, given the size and the scale of spend responding to the impact of the virus, will in effect develop their own forms of a COVID agenda, and clean air will undoubtedly be one of them. So it's going to accelerate the push for clean air, which again will accelerate the micro-fulfillment off the back of electric vehicles. I think distribution space is becoming even more sought after. So it's increasing the demand for distribution space rather than reducing it. A couple of reasons for that. If you're working in the social distancing environment within a warehouse, clearly it depends on the distance that's required. But at 2 meters, the statistical evidence suggests that the reduction in employable workforce can be of the order of 20 to 30%. So if we detune that for say a meter, meter and a half social distancing, even if you take that down to 10%, it's a very significant impact on third-party operations or logistics operations, given the very tight operational margins most of these sites are run under. So I think you're going to be doing a direct correlation. Assuming the impact of the virus is around for several years, this will increase the pressure on distribution property. And then there are other factors, emergency warehousing to store protective equipment or NHS supplies. Be interesting to see what actually emerges from the onshoring conversations, but all these are going to increase the pressure on distribution space. And then finally, the other very obvious impact of the virus is to increase the already accelerating trend around online sales. So the Office of National Statistics for the 3 months ending the end of May showed that retail sales fell by nearly 13%, but the only area not to fall were online sales, and online sales now for those 3-month period accounted for 33% of all sales. So let's look at some of the factors driving micro-fulfilment, and I think one of the most significant factors is a fundamental change in the way that the previously separate sectors of distribution and retail will work. So if we look at a pre-e-commerce environment, distribution was viewed as one sector and retailing viewed as another sector. I'm talking about property and operations, so typically speaking, these were defined sectors. Clearly, the impact of e-commerce meant that, particularly for bricks and mortars retailing, traditional retailing, there was an overlap then. So some of their operations could be defined as distribution, some could be defined as retail, and then their online operations might be viewed as a kind of combination of the two. I think increasingly what's happening now is there is no distinction between the distribution and the retail sectors, and it is just one sector. In fact, in many ways, given what I think will be a further very significant decline in the demand for retail property in terms of store space, effectively, I think you're going to see in many ways the distribution sector overtaking large amounts of the retail sector. Interesting to speculate what will happen to the demand for retail space in terms of stores, but I could easily see another 25 to 30% going over the next 5 years or so. So let's summarize some of the factors that we think are going to drive micro-fulfillment. I think stores are just going to appear less safe and less desirable. There may be some flagship destinations, but my own view is that the impact of the virus will be significant over the next 3 to 4 years. There will be a form of social distancing until a successful vaccine has not just been developed, but it's been deployed and adopted by the majority of the population. So for the next 3 to 4 years, will visiting a store seem anything like as attractive as it once were? Customer demands are going to increase. The progression around same-day delivery and the range of products and late order cut-off times will continue to push an ever-increasing amount of volume into online sales. And as these sales become more orientated towards same-day or very late day, again, they're going to need more online, more micro-fulfillment. And then I think another significant impact is that there will be a further huge tranche of stores to close. Let's assume that retail sales either stay stable or probably more likely decline marginally by a few percentage points. And then let's assume that the trend to online sales continues. In effect, what you're going to get is a move away from the high street of perhaps something of the order of 5 to 10% in volume. That is enough to make another further tranche of stores unprofitable. So you're just going to see more store closures. And then online shopping, as we say, will drive the need for flexible, responsive supply chains. So for many, many situations, this combination of reduced retail space, the inability to fund stores, and the increase in customer service expectations can only be met by micro-fulfillment operations. What type of micro-fulfillment will take place? Some will be in purpose-built buildings. There will be many, many industrial units of the sort of 15, 20, 25, 30,000 square foot size. Many will be adapted in adapted buildings. So the kind of DPD model of take what you can find and find a way of working with it, I think will be increasingly deployed. Many will be small-scale operations working 24/7. these aren't easy environments to recruit and retain good quality employees, and they're likely, therefore, to be highly suitable for goods-to-man robotic platforms. They'll be too small for large-scale automation and mechanization, and yet recruiting and retaining labor in these areas won't be easy. And because the range and type of the work will vary, and also because of the work patterns will tend to be more of a wave, with waves of activity taking place, again, they will be highly suited to robotic platforms, or perhaps I should say robotic platforms will be highly suited to the nature and type of work taking place in micro-fulfillment. And finally, although the operations may be remote and spread out throughout the country, operators will still want to have a common view of what's happening there and a common view of stock and operations and performance. So again, the ability to upload information from robotic platforms into a standard operating system sitting above this, I think makes platforms very, very suited to this kind of operation. I'm now going to hand over to Nigel Lahiri of Grey Orange. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Just before we start, I think I'm waiting for the screen to be shared. Chloe, are you going to make me the, that's it, thank you. Excellent. Not quite as seamless as I would have liked, but here we go. So thank you, Tim, for sharing some of your interesting insights into what you see happening in the retail distribution field, specifically around the micro-fulfillment strategies that no doubt companies will be adopting. So what I'm going to be doing now is talking a bit about the technology that we as Grey Orange have developed, and then put that into the context of some of the themes that Tim's highlighted around micro-fulfillment, and talk a bit about what we're seeing with some of our customers around the world and how they're taking this technology and implementing it into these kinds of environment. I've started off by just calling this section of the presentation High Yield Fulfillment in the Age of Immediacy. I think that's appropriate because it highlights the problem, but also the solution. The problem being the age of immediacy, and the solution is needing to have high yield fulfillment operations. So I don't want to go over some of the key themes that Tim's nicely highlighted for us, but I just wanted to bring out one or two points that I thought was relevant here. As we sort of said, retailers are going through this time of change. The fulfillment immediacy is how we describe it, which is related to all the issues around customer expectations, around fast deliveries. We've talked, Tim's mentioned already, the margin squeeze that creates for retailers and those challenges that need to be met. And I think often it's now the supply chain that's going to be able to save the retailers in terms of making sure they manage to maintain margin in this new world. And we also talked there about some of the challenges around labor and space and the different types of space. But I just wanted to pick out that last point on this slide here, because Grey Orange, when our founders formed the company just 7 years ago, they came from a background of robotic engineering. So they were experts in robots, and they decided they wanted to try and apply their skill set to a big business problem. So apply robotics to a big business problem. They decided supply chain was the problem that was a great fit for their skills and their technology. And when they looked at the supply chains of many companies, they recognized this fact, that a lot of the technology that's being deployed in warehouses and distribution operations has been developed for a previous era when retail distribution was a very different model, basically retail fulfillment. And therefore they recognized that in trying to apply robotics into this environment, there needed to be a big technology shift as well. And we talk about the Amazon effect. Everybody's familiar with that, I'm sure, how Amazon have changed the game in many ways around the world. And one of the things that Amazon recognized at a very early stage was the need to implement technology. Tim mentioned, I think he said something like 100,000 robots have been deployed in Western Europe. Probably they're all Amazon robots, mainly, not all, but a large number of them are. We think there are about 100,000 robots that Amazon have deployed across their distribution operations globally, largely the sort of goods to person robotic solutions that we're going to be talking about in a second. So clearly they saw the need to invest in this kind of technology in order to change their fulfillment capabilities. So we looked at it, we looked at what technology was needed, and as I've said, it's not just about the robots. So we recognized at a very early stage that the software that supports these environments also needs to be something that is appropriate for the needs of this new world in which retailers find themselves. So we went about building from the sort of ground up a new platform designed to meet some of the challenges that we've been talking about. The first point being that we recognize that the software that drives these fulfillment operations needs to contemplate and integrate fully with robots. It needs to be designed for that robotic environment. So the development language that we used, I won't go into the technology now, but the development language we used to develop the technology was designed to make sure there was persistence of communication, that it was enabled multi-threaded decision making in real time, spatial awareness, all the things that are so important for a kind of robotic environment. So we built our platform. Grey Matter is the software that we built. We also recognize the need for using and leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, in order to be able to really make use of the vast amount of data that sits within a fulfillment operation in order to better optimize all of the processes. So we went about building our new software solution, Grey Matter, and we also, of course, we come from an engineering background. We built robots, again, that were appropriate for this environment. So we describe this as being the fulfillment operating system that the Grey Orange developed. I don't want to go through the details of this at this point, but maybe just pull out a few features and capabilities of our software that is particularly pertinent to this kind of micro fulfillment discussion that we're going to be having in more detail in a second. So what are some of those? We've got something there called N-deep inventory access. So one of the key things within a micro fulfillment center is, as Tim was highlighting, that the size and the shape of these centers could be really quite small. Micro gives that away. And so having the ability to have extremely deep and dense storage is really important. So the N-deep inventory access capability of the solution means that you don't have to have aisles. Robots understand how to flex and change the density of storage in order to meet the current needs. But it allows you to have that real high density of storage, and we'll sort of talk to that a bit later on in our presentation. Waveless order streaming, again, is another key capability. We think about traditional fulfillment centers, often they work in batches or waves of orders. We think that's suboptimal. So we think that when you look at orders within the context of a e-commerce fulfillment center, you need to be much more dynamic in the way in which you assign priorities and tasks to pick orders. And it needs to be real time. It needs to be based upon what's happening in the here and now in that particular fulfillment center. So there are some specific capabilities that we developed that we think are appropriate, not just for these environments, but for other goods-to-person type environments. So we talk about the software, but of course, robots are important. So we're going to look at, as we go through this presentation, how we use a combination of the robotic hardware that we manufacture, which is at the bottom of our screen there. We talk about goods-to-person platform. We've got a number of platforms that support different payloads, autonomous picking, we'll see this in action, intralogistics, and also robotic sortation solutions as well. All of these designed to be operated within the context of Grey Matter, and we have a number of software modules and suite of applications that are used to drive these processes. So that's really just an introduction to some of the hardware, the software. The third component within the sort of goods-to-person sort of fulfillment operations solution is the accessories. We call them the accessories. So again, we have mobile storage units that are moved around by the robots and pick, hook, and pack stations. And the key thought about these accessories is that they're highly configurable and highly flexible in terms of how they can be used in a particular environment. And again, we'll highlight that with a particular case study a little bit later on. But just on the screen there, you've got hanging garments, you've got different sizes and shapes of piece and eaches picking environments, and you've got even pallets that can be moved within these environments. The pick-put stations, again, are highly configurable, so they can be used to suit the specific business process that they're supporting. And again, within the software capability, you have the option of being able to use them dynamically. So sometimes they might be just dedicated to be putting away product, but sometimes just for picking, and sometimes essentially for both activities. So that's the kind of context of the hardware that we sort of produce and the software that we produce as an organization to try and deal with some of these challenges that we faced. So what I want to talk about now are some of the concepts that we're seeing in our customers and how they're applying this technology in their distribution operations, and a couple of case studies and just a couple of concepts as well that we've been developing with partners in the US. So let me just start by talking about something that Tim mentioned earlier on. So this is a schematic of Cabot Circus, which is a retail shopping centre in the centre of Bristol, just down the road from where I live. And I think, as Tim alluded to, a lot of these shopping centres around the country, they have an awful lot of space that's unused, non-customer friendly space. And on the right-hand side here, we've got just an example of that. Below Cabot Circus, there's a space that could be used for all kinds of different operations. But one operation that's being contemplated for that space is an urban delivery hub. And the reason I wanted to put that up on the screen was because it really highlights one of the challenges when you think about micro-fulfillment centers, because clearly that isn't a purpose-built distribution operation. It has all kinds of constraints, physical constraints that you can see there. So if you wanted to turn that into a fulfillment center and to put automation into it, you need a flexible solution. Flexible in terms of the type of storage you can put in there, flexible in terms of how you deploy it as well. You wouldn't want to be putting technology into that area that required heavy engineering of any description. So the goods-to-person types of robotic solutions that we'll be talking about are ideally suited to these unconventional spaces that companies, retailers might be considering as they look at the space that's becoming available, perhaps on the high street even, or in other centres such as the Cabot Circus centre that we've just talked about. So flexibility is a key issue that needs to be considered. So I just want to highlight a couple of models that we've been working on with customers, and then we'll talk about a hybrid model as well in a second. So when we think about micro-fulfillment centers, and these are just obviously schematics to illustrate the point really, that there are kind of two scenarios that we see emerging within our customer base. And we work with Fortune 500 retailers, global retailers around the planet. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a click and collect fulfillment center. So this is a typical type in scenario where maybe a retailer would put at the back of their store, they create a sort of fulfillment operation, a micro-fulfillment operation, specifically to serve click and collect customers in a sort of distance way. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second. On the right-hand side is a more traditional micro-fulfillment center. So that's just purely based on providing a service to service the e-commerce orders for a particular retailer. So those are the two scenarios that we see that are emerging. Dedicated micro-fulfillment centers that are not connected to the retail outlet, or space that's been assigned within the retail store for some kind of micro-fulfillment capability. Those are the 2 points being made by those graphics. And we're also seeing, and this is something we will talk about in a lot more detail in a second, we're also seeing a hybrid approach. So again, this is a micro-fulfillment center, but again, it's at the back of a store operation. And in this scenario, this is a scenario we've designed with a partner in the US, In this scenario, we've got a click and collect operation as well as an e-commerce micro-fulfillment center combined into a single space at the back of the store. So it's a constrained space. I think the design of this, I think if I remember, was about 7,000 square feet, so that's a fairly confined space. And in order to maximize that space, I mentioned the need for this sort of flexible high density storage capability. Well, these mobile storage units provide that. And it's a completely personless area. So as you can see on the graphic there, we've got the click and collect on the left-hand side where customers come and pick up their picked orders. The robots, again, are moving the product to the customer. We've got a little video in a second that illustrates that. And on the right-hand side, again, we've got a completely automated picking process for e-commerce orders. And we've got 2 or 3 people there managing the inbound and outbound processes for that particular operation. But apart from that, it's completely labor-free in terms of the fulfillment part of that operation. So that kind of hybrid approach, as we'll see in a second, we're seeing quite a lot of in our customer base around the globe. So let's have a look at, and that's just, by the way, some capacity figures. So in that instance, it was 7,000 square feet, picking a number of thousands of orders per day. So it's 25 robots in that particular scenario that we've designed. So I just want to show you a video now, which basically looks at what one of our customers has done, and was looking specifically at a micro-fulfillment operation that is designed for click and collect. So the context is that this is a big box retailer. It's a company called Sodimac. So when you think of Sodimac, think of B&Q. It's that kind of retailer, home and DIY retailer across South America. And they've got the big box stores, and we've already implemented 300-400 robots in their omni-channel fulfillment center over the last few years. And they asked us to help them as they were thinking through how they were going to further develop their in-store click and collect capability. So they formed a trial store where they created this micro-fulfillment center for click and collect. We've implemented some robots, and this just highlights this video, the processes that we support. So I'll just play the video through, and maybe there's a bit of music as well, but I'll offer some commentary over it as well. So Sodimac is the customer. So that's an example of one of our goods to person Ranger robots. So this is a small contained area, an inbound area for the customer orders to be entered into the system. Highly flexible MSUs, these mobile storage units that you can see here, that have been configured specifically for this environment, enables them to handle the wide range of order types that their customers are wanting to pick up. So we mentioned flexibility of being a key factor of these solutions. So as peaks and troughs come and go, you're able to add more MSUs into the environment, more robots to handle increased throughput. So a highly scalable solution as we see these robots moving around, so putting away. And here's the customer coming into the site, scanning his order in the bottom of the reader there. The robots then go and retrieve that customer's order from the MSU, obviously knows where it is, instantly, delivers it to a sort of a kind of locker hub, and the customer then picks it out. So that's one example, if you like, of some of the work that we're doing, where robots have really provided an operation that can operate 24/7. It's distances from a human standpoint. There's no interaction with store staff and customers in that particular environment, and is enabling Sodimac to really increase the throughput of their click and collect operation through their stores. They see that as a valuable part of their business, as many do. I just want to highlight another example, which is more the hybrid approach that we've seen. So this again is one of our customers that have, again, they're in the home sort of retail sector, based in Scandinavia. They have big blue shops, and so you might guess who they are. And this is for a concept that they're introducing into a store in Finland. So this is quite a busy screen, but it kind of nicely illustrates some of the strengths of this kind of technology in this kind of micro-fulfillment environment. So here we see on the left-hand side the grey-orange Ranger goods-to-person field. So that's the area that we operate in. It's as we said before, it's a personless area. It's only accessed by robots. And really the key thing I want to pull out of this slide, or two things, I guess. One is that if you look at the sort of order processes that we're supporting on the left-hand side, there are three distinct types of order processes that we're managing. So the first is out of this single space, home delivery. So that's obviously e-commerce orders. So they wanted to be able to utilize inventory in their stores. So this is within a store environment to fulfill orders for customers that live obviously in that area. The second order process is what they call full serve handout orders. So as you can imagine, in this kind of retailer, you can go into the store, you can be browsing the showroom, and you can use an app or a tablets in the store showroom itself to order something that you've just seen and sat on. And by the time you leave the store, that order's been picked and is ready for collection for you as you exit the store. And the third process is the traditional click and collect, obviously, where you order online and go to store to pick up the items. So they wanted to be able to operate those three different models out of the same inventory, out of the same goods to person area within the store. The other sort of complexity, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen there, and this again speaks well to what we discussed earlier on, which is the need to have solutions that can operate in non-traditional sort of fulfillment center operations, is that this is a sort of three mezzanine floor operation. So again, the goods to person area then is over 3 floors, just to make sure that's clear. So that adds some complexity. The software needs to be able to understand that and be able to move the robots across stores through an automated link to the lifts that exist within the operation. So we can automate that whole process, movement up and down of lifts with the integration that we have to lift technology that we've developed for a number of our customers. So a fairly sort of complex operating environment that we were able to manage. So some of the benefits that they see developing from this, this idea of dense storage was important, but also having flexible storage, so range handling flexibility. It's amazing to think that when you think about a store of that type, that 85% of the article range can be handled through this goods to person area. So that's 90% of the order lines are picked through this area, and that speaks to the flexibility of the MSUs that will be deployed in that particular zone. We said that it's going to handle different flows. Again, the software can do that, so we can manage different flows. It recognizes the different types of orders and the priorities within those orders, and that enables them to sort of cross-utilize resources across those different material flows in order to optimize that process. Improve customer experience, the speed of delivery is really important. The throughput that they're able to drive through this operation is highly increased, and specifically for customers that are ordering in store and picking up before they leave the store, and being able to manage that process effectively is really important. They recognize, as I think many people do now, that improved customer experience is the key KPI now for measuring supply chain success, or one of the key ones at least. And the final point is that they wanted to be able to take this kind of model and apply it to different stores which have different footprints and different kind of scenarios, and have the flexibility to be able to take it and deploy it in those environments as well. And again, as we say, I think I've mentioned this a few times, flexibility when you're thinking about a micro-fulfillment operation is key. Flexibility of how you can use the space that might be available to you. So finally, I just wanted to finish by talking a bit about sort of our vision, if you like, of how we see things developing in this new world. We've talked a lot about the challenges that retailers face. One of them is labor issues, as we've said, in terms of the availability of labor. So what could a fully autonomous distribution operation look like? What sort of performance could you expect out of this kind of operation? We're going to show you a little video just to conclude that highlights how we see that working and how we see different technologies coming together to operate in this environment. But high throughput environments, that's a key thing, 600 picks per hour of the sorts of things we're looking to achieve. High density of storage, that NDeep technology that I mentioned before, having a real handle on the real-time activity that's going on in the warehouse through dashboards and inventory statuses. Having flexibility about how the different processes are managed in the warehouse as well are important in terms of being able to switch processes, switch priorities based on the real-time nature of what's going on, what the demand profile looks right now in the operation. Those are some of the key things that, key themes, if you like, that we've been working towards. So I just want to show you another video which looks at this kind of environment and some of its visionary, some of its existing technology. I'll highlight both of those things as we go through this video. So this talks to obviously the immediacy that we see in the customer world that is a reality now for retail, and even more so in this new COVID environment. So we're going to see a range of different technologies in this video that can be deployed. We'll see that Grey Matter, the software, is constantly analyzing every single transaction in a real-time nature, making real-time decisions. So we just featured there the intralogistics robots. So these kind of robots operate in areas where people operate. So they don't work in a sort of a personless area like the goods-to-person robots operate. So therefore they need different types of technology to steer them around safely. Those kind of environments, they work on LiDAR technology. So we have inbound pallets being taken by the intralogistics robots to a collection point where a different type of robot picks them up, and this is taking product to taking SKUs to the deep storage or reserve storage areas of a sort of lights out distribution operation. So here we have robots that are operating as forklift trucks essentially, and automating the put away of pallets. So we see this very much in the future as well in terms of technology that's emerging at this time. Intralogistics robots exist today and are used. The other ones are emerging technologies from the grey-orange stable of hardware. So here we now have the intralogistics robots taking the pallets to the case and item picking area. Robotic arms, again, these things exist. Building the MSUs, ensuring that the MSUs are built with the right profile of product based upon the immediate history and demand that's being analyzed in the operation. And again, the decisions around where product is stored, how dense product is stored, is all done in real time to optimize the business, to optimize the operation. It takes into account the real-time nature of what's going on in terms of customer demand. Again, we talked about the integration with lifts, so we can move up and down mezzanine areas. And here's a concept we've been looking at, which is robotic, not just picking. So picking is possible now with picking arms. We produce those, but also pick, pack, and labeling robots. So again, we're sort of looking at how to develop this kind of technology so that again, this whole process can be managed for certain products without human intervention. And finally, another robot that we do work with and has been installed in Europe, a number of sites, are these mobile sortation robots. So again, without the need for screwing conveyors into the ground, these robots can react more flexibly to demand as it develops and provide a sortation capability. So that's the kind of vision of how we see things developing in the future. A lot of that's already here, and we're already operating in that way. And as you can see, there are hundreds of robots operating in that site. Some sites that we operate, something like 500 robots concurrently operating. So that's a key capability that needs to be found in any provider of this technology. So just to sum up, meeting the challenge in the age of immediacy, a technology designed for the current challenges is something that we think is important. Flexibility, scalability, movability, we can move technology from one site to another site really easily in this kind of environment. Nothing's screwed to the ground, so therefore the ability to move it around your distribution operation to meet different peaks and different challenges in your distribution operation. Speed of deployment, I think Tim's mentioned this already, it's months, not years, to deploy one of these solutions in a micro-fulfillment center, literally a few months. Increased throughput with no labor, minimum labor increase, dense storage for micro-fulfillment operations, and hybrid process to support the changing environments that our customers, our retail customers find that are driven by ever-changing customer needs. So that just concludes our presentation. So thank you very much indeed for your time. And I think we can now hand over to Chloe. If there are any questions that need to be addressed, she'll channel those accordingly.
That's great. Thank you very much, both to Nigel and Tim, for some really interesting insights. We have some questions coming in already, but just a quick reminder for anybody who would like to, who has another question that they'd like to ask. You can ask that question through the chat panel on your screen. So first question, Nigel, I think possibly for you. How long does it take to implement a GTP solution in comparison with other forms of automation?
Yeah, we sort of touched upon this. I mean, it does depend slightly on the size and scale, of course, but you can do it in months, literally in months. I think if you look at the example of the micro-fulfillment center for Sodimac in Chile, we did that in literally, I think, 3 months from start to finish, the whole project. You compare that to your traditional automation, maybe Tim knows a bit more about this than perhaps I do even, but it can be years. I mean, literally, you've got to make it, you've got to bolt it to the ground. This is after all the whole design process. So those projects are, typically multiple months. Tim, is that how you see it?
Yeah, completely. I think more or less at every stage in the process. So the design stage for large automation is long. Often the internal sign-off is long, the systems integration is complex, and that's before you go to a manufacturer where they're able to, at the moment, probably pick and choose their customers. So I think you're probably typically for a medium-sized automation program, by medium I might mean sort of in the £10 million plus range, I doubt you'd get one of those designed, implemented and installed in under 2 years, and it could be anything up to 3 or 4 years for something larger, versus, as you say, months for this. And also, just a related point, I think the capital and that whole process of certainty makes this a much more deployable solution, because you're not creating something from scratch that brings together many different types of automation from different suppliers in a complex software environment. This is much more akin to something, say, like a sorter, where you're putting in a point solution that's very tried and tested and easy to put in. So again, that capital return, the business case, it's all a lot more robust. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. Thanks both. Next question. So what are the main considerations when buying a GTP system?
What are the main considerations?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there are a number of things. I think you've got to think about how it integrates to the. Well, I think the first thing is you've got to recognise that it's not just a hardware problem, an engineering technology problem in that sense. In other words, it's not just about buying robots. Robots you can buy those from multiple sources now. It is about designing a process that truly optimizes those robots and having the software that does that as well. Try to emphasize that through the presentation. And also thinking about how that sits within the framework of your existing software architecture that you might have. So obviously you integrated with WMS and other technologies you might have in your environment. So I think one of the key things is to recognize it's not just about robots moving from A to B. It's about reimagining the processes in a very different environment and optimizing those with the appropriate technology. I think that's one of the things. You've got to think about the sort of throughput you're looking for, and space issues, constraints, and all these sort of other factors come into it, I guess. But for me, the key thing is just recognizing that it's about changing the way you do things, as opposed to just automating something with like an AGV type capability. It's much more than that.
That's great. Thanks, Nigel. And how does grey matter coexist with the WMS?
So we expected always to integrate with the WMS. So we're not replacing a WMS in the environments that we operate in. So, but the WMS, when a grey matter implementation is deployed, is probably doing less. So again, what we would say is for where a grey matter project is implemented, is again to recognise the strengths of both solutions and try not to, if you like, handcuff the capabilities of grey matter, but getting too much of the functionality done by the WMS. So there's absolutely obvious integration points, you know, master data and other data that comes from the WMS. Orders would come down from the WMS, but we wouldn't want to be constrained by, for example, the WMS producing waves of orders and batches of orders and then getting us to pick batches. We want to be far more dynamic than that. So we've integrated with a number of the leading WMS vendors around the world. Again, the key thing is just to understand where those demarcations need to exist and being honest and realistic about that.
That's great. Thank you. Well, that brings us very nicely to the end of our Q&A session and to the end of the time we have available. So I'd like to end by thanking our speakers today, Nigel Lahiri, Sales Director, EMEA at Grey Orange, and Tim Orid, Director at the Ford Partnership, for being with us on this webinar. Thanks to you too, our listeners, for tuning in today and for your questions. And as always, we'll follow up by email with the link to the on-demand webinar so you can listen again at your convenience. So thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Nigel. And
Thanks,
thank you all. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.